At the height of the 1990s supermodel era, one name stood out among the rest: Linda Evangelista. She wasn't just a face on magazine covers or a figure on catwalks. She was the icon, known for her fierce beauty, her bold personality, and that unforgettable quote, "I don't get out of bed for less than $10,000 a day." But behind the fame, fashion, and flashing lights, there was a woman who would one day face a personal battle so unexpected, it would take her out of the spotlight for years. Linda ruled the runway like no other. Designers adored her. Photographers chased her. Alongside Naomi Campbell, Cindy Crawford, and Christy Turlington, she helped redefine what it meant to be a supermodel. But when the cameras stopped flashing and the crowds moved on, Linda's story took a heartbreaking turn, one that the world wouldn't fully understand until much later. She disappeared from the public eye. No red carpets, no interviews, no new campaigns. For years, the fashion world whispered, "Where did she go? What happened to the woman who once transformed her look with just a haircut and changed fashion forever?" Then, after years of silence, Linda came forward with a truth that stunned even her closest fans. A single procedure, a decision she believed was safe, would forever change not just her face, but her life. And what followed was not just physical pain, but emotional isolation, shame, and a fight to reclaim her voice in a world that had once adored her. This is the story of how a supermodel fell from the world stage, not because of scandal or age, but because of something far more personal. And what she reveals next might change how we look at beauty forever. Before Linda Evangelista became a fashion legend, she was just a small-town girl from Canada with a big dream. She was discovered at a beauty pageant when she was still a teenager, and before long, she was swept into the whirlwind of international modeling. What set Linda apart wasn't just her beauty, it was her ability to transform. She could reinvent herself with every shoot, every campaign, every look. One week she was edgy and androgynous, the next, classic and glamorous. Designers loved her because she didn't just wear fashion, she became it. In the golden age of the supermodel, Linda was everywhere. Her face defined the era. She worked with every major designer: Versace, Chanel, Dior, and graced the covers of Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, and countless others. Alongside Naomi, Cindy, and Christy, she wasn't just part of the fashion world. She was at its center. Together, they walked in the most iconic shows and starred in the biggest campaigns. They weren't just models, they were celebrities, cultural forces. And for Linda, it all seemed unstoppable. But the fashion industry is fickle. As the 2000s rolled in, tastes began to shift. New faces emerged, and slowly, the spotlight moved on. Linda took a step back. She wasn't booking as many jobs, and she chose to focus on her personal life. She became a mother. She valued her privacy. But in an industry built on appearance, aging, even gracefully, was often met with pressure. Linda, like many women, faced an impossible standard. Years passed, and while some supermodels transitioned into business or stayed in the public eye, Linda stayed silent. She was almost nowhere to be seen. When she finally resurfaced, it wasn't on a runway, it was with a painful confession. A cosmetic procedure she had hoped would help her feel more confident had gone terribly wrong. But even then, she kept the details private. The media only knew pieces, and the fashion world was left wondering, how could something so routine and so tragically? As whispers swirled and questions remained unanswered, Linda stayed out of sight, hiding not from fame, but from shame. The woman who once dominated billboards now avoided mirrors. But what exactly happened? What was this procedure that changed everything? And how did it nearly erase one of fashion's brightest stars? The truth was more heartbreaking than anyone could have imagined. The truth Linda Evangelista eventually revealed sent shockwaves through both the fashion world and her loyal fans. She shared that she had undergone a popular cosmetic procedure called cool sculpting, a non-invasive treatment meant to reduce fat. It was marketed as safe, quick, and effective. But for Linda, it did the opposite. Instead of shrinking the treated areas, her body reacted in a rare and unexpected way. She developed a condition called paradoxical adipose hyperplasia, or PAH. Her fat cells grew, harder, larger, and unmovable. And worst of all, it couldn't be reversed without surgery. At first, she tried to stay hopeful. Maybe the swelling would go down. Maybe it would just take time. But it didn't. Over the next few months, she watched helplessly as her body began changing in ways she hadn't anticipated. The woman once celebrated for her sculpted cheekbones and iconic jawline now struggled to recognize her own reflection. She began covering up with scarves, hiding from the cameras that once adored her. She wore loose clothes, avoided events, and canceled appearances. Slowly, fear and shame replaced the confidence she had spent a lifetime building. Behind closed doors, Linda was battling more than just a physical transformation. Her mental health began to suffer. She was grieving, not just the change in her appearance, but the loss of the career, identity, and public image she had spent decades cultivating. Friends reached out, but she often withdrew. Rumors swirled. People guessed about weight gain, aging, even illness. But the truth remained hidden. She was living in silence, tormented by a decision she made in pursuit of self-improvement. And as she stayed in the shadows, another struggle quietly unfolded. The modeling industry, which once called her their muse, continued without her. New campaigns launched. New faces rose. But Linda's absence was still felt, especially by those who had admired her strength and presence. Meanwhile, the treatment that altered her life remained widely advertised, promising effortless beauty to countless others. The question lingered in Linda's mind and in the minds of her closest followers. How could something promoted as safe leave her feeling disfigured and broken? And what would it take for her to face the world again, not as a supermodel, but as a woman finally ready to tell her side of the story? As the years went by, Linda Evangelista kept her secret hidden, even from many of those closest to her. On the outside, it looked like she had simply chosen a quiet life away from fame. But behind the scenes, she was drowning in fear, isolation, and regret. Every mirror reminded her of what had happened. Every headline featuring a fellow supermodel brought back a rush of memories, her time on the runway, the thrill of photo shoots, the feeling of being celebrated for her beauty. That world now felt like it belonged to someone else. She spent her days mostly at home, avoiding events, dodging cameras, and shrinking further from the public eye. Friends gently encouraged her to rejoin the world, but Linda wasn't ready. She had become deeply self-conscious, afraid of being judged, photographed, or worse, pitted. She tried wearing compression garments. She had multiple surgeries to fix what had gone wrong. But the physical results didn't erase the emotional scars. She felt disfigured, not just on the outside, but in spirit. Behind closed doors, Linda was also fighting a legal battle. She filed a lawsuit against the company behind the procedure, claiming that not only had it harmed her body, but it had also ruined her career and deeply affected her mental health. But even as that case moved forward, Linda stayed silent in the media. She didn't want sympathy. She wanted understanding. She wanted to feel like herself again. But what did that even mean anymore? And while all this unfolded, the fashion industry kept moving. Her name still held weight, still echoed in documentaries and retrospectives. But her presence was a void no one could ignore. She was the supermodel who had vanished, and rumors filled the gap left by silence. Some whispered that she had simply aged out. Others guessed that she'd had work done and was hiding the results. But none of them knew the truth, the raw, painful, deeply personal truth that Linda had carried alone for too long. Then came the moment she could no longer ignore, the need to tell her story, in her own words. She had kept it in for 5 long years. But now, standing at the edge of public re-entry, with the world waiting and watching, she faced the most terrifying question of all. Would anyone accept the woman she had become? Or would they only remember the face she used to be? Just when Linda Evangelista finally found the strength to step back into the public eye and speak her truth, she was hit with an unexpected second wave of conflict, one she never saw coming. After years of hiding and healing, She decided to share her story in a deeply personal interview, revealing the effects of the cool sculpting procedure and the emotional damage that followed. Her words were honest, raw, and brave. For the first time in years, she let the world see her pain. She expected compassion. She hoped for support. But not everyone reacted with kindness. Almost instantly, the internet responded, some with empathy, others with cruelty. While many praised her courage, a loud minority questioned her motives. Some called it a publicity move. Others accused her of blaming the procedure for natural aging. Anonymous comments picked apart her appearance. Photos of her resurfaced online with harsh headlines and unfair comparisons. It was like being thrown back into the harshest parts of fame, only now without the armor she once had. For Linda, it felt like a second wound. After everything she had been through, after staying silent for so long, she was now being judged for finally speaking up. The very thing that took her out of the spotlight, the procedure gone wrong, was now being used as ammunition against her. The modeling world she once ruled had evolved, but some things hadn't changed. The pressure to look perfect, the expectation to remain ageless, and the unforgiving glare of public opinion were all still there, sharper than ever. And then came the legal complications. As her story gained attention, the company behind the procedure responded with denial, pushing back against her claims. Statements were made. Lawyers became involved. The case that had once felt so personal was now playing out on a much larger stage. It wasn't just about Linda anymore. It was about the thousands of others who had trusted the same treatment and never heard of the risk she experienced. Her story was giving voice to many, but it also made her a target. To make things even harder, brands and agencies began quietly distancing themselves. Despite decades of being a fashion icon, Linda was now seen as a risk. Bookings didn't come. Campaigns never called. A few supportive voices reached out privately, but publicly, the silence was deafening. The industry that once celebrated her transformation now avoided the conversation around her trauma. And as she tried to stay strong, raising her son and holding on to what was left of her privacy, she began to realize this battle was bigger than just her image. It was about truth, justice, and reclaiming her identity, not as a model, but as a human being who had endured something deeply painful. But there was still one thing the public didn't know, something Linda hadn't shared in any interview or a legal document. A final detail, buried in medical reports and quietly discussed behind closed doors. A discovery that could not only shift the outcome of her case but also expose how much the industry really knew and chose to ignore. In the months that followed, Linda Evangelista chose not to retreat. Instead, she stepped forward, fully, honestly, and unapologetically. She shared more of her story, not just with magazines or in courtrooms, but directly with her audience. She posted unfiltered photos. She attended events again, even if it meant facing cameras she once feared. Slowly, the narrative began to shift. She was no longer the supermodel who vanished, but the woman who survived, spoke up, and took back her power. The lawsuit was eventually settled. Though the terms were confidential, Linda finally had closure. It wasn't about money, it was about acknowledgement, about being heard, about standing up for herself after years of silence. Her courage opened a wider conversation around beauty standards, body image, and the hidden risks of cosmetic procedures that are often marketed as effortless and safe. Many women came forward, saying they too had experienced side effects, but were too afraid to speak. Linda's voice helped them feel seen. Fashion began to embrace her again, not just as a supermodel, but as a symbol of resilience. She returned to the cover of British Vogue, proudly showing her face and telling the world, "This is me."
No edits, no shame, no apologies.
Brands reached out, not out of pity, but because her story resonated. She was real. She was human. She had lived through something many wouldn't have survived, and she came back stronger. More than a story about beauty or fame, Linda's journey became one about healing. She learned to love herself in a new way, not through the lens of perfection, but through acceptance. She reminded the world that even those who appear flawless carry deep wounds. And she reminded herself that courage isn't in hiding the pain, it's in facing it. Today, Linda Evangelista may not be the same woman who once ruled the runway, but that's the point.
She's more than that now.
She's a mother, a survivor, a voice for others. Her story will always be tied to beauty, but not the kind sold in ads or defined by trends. The beauty that matters is the kind she rediscovered in herself, raw, real, and unbreakable.